April 1st, 1945. A 19-year-old Marine named Ray Akins steps off a landing craft onto the beach at Okinawa. He weighs 202 pounds. 81 days later, when the fighting finally stops, he will weigh 146. He has no way of knowing it yet, but this is the same man who will one day be called grandfather by a Super Bowl champion, Drew Brees. Right now, none of that exists. There is no NFL, no Lombardi Trophy, no grandson not yet born. There is only the ramp coming down, the beach in front of him, and no way back to the boat. Okinawa would become the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, bigger than Normandy in the number of ships involved. Nearly 500,000 Americans would take part. It would also become the bloodiest single battle the United States fought against Japan. Ray Akins carried a 37mm anti-tank gun into that fight as part of a special weapons company in the 1st Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. This is Echoes of Valor X. Today we tell the true story of Robert Ray Akins. He was born May 13, 1925 in McCulloch County, Texas, and raised in the small farming community of New Baden, the kind of town where a boy's name was known before he was old enough to earn a reputation of his own. This was Depression-era Texas. Cotton, cattle, and hard weather. Boys grew up fast, or they didn't grow up at all. Money was scarce and work was constant. And by his teenage years, Akins was already accustomed to the kind of physical labor that would later serve him well in the Marine Corps. By the time he was old enough to enlist, the war in the Pacific had already swallowed thousands of young Americans on islands with names like Tarawa and Peleliu. He was one of tens of thousands of Marines pushed through accelerated training as the war ground toward what planners expected would be an invasion of Japan itself. Akins would be sent into the middle of the worst of what remained. He trained hard. His instructors did not sugarcoat what was coming. In the oral history he gave decades later to the National WWII Museum, Akins would say that his training had done something strange to him. It had convinced him, and every man beside him, that he probably would not survive what was next. He carried that belief onto the beach anyway. Okinawa was not supposed to be easy, but even the planners underestimated what waited inland. The Japanese command had abandoned the beaches almost entirely, letting the Marines and Army divisions walk ashore unopposed on day one, then pulled them into a network of caves, ridgelines, and fortified hills to the south, where every yard would be paid for in blood. Above them, kamikaze aircraft were beginning the deadliest suicide air campaign of the war, aimed at the ships anchored offshore. Before the campaign ended, Japanese kamikaze pilots would sink dozens of American ships and damage hundreds more. The costliest naval battle of the entire war for the United States Navy. On the ground, Akins manned his 37mm gun in support of the tanks pushing through the ridges. When armor took a hit and caught fire, the crews inside had seconds to get out before the vehicle became a coffin. Akins and the men around him ran forward under fire to pull burned tank crewmen out of the wreckage. Japanese snipers dug into the high ground, knew the pattern. They waited for the rescue, then fired on the men doing the pulling. It was a battlefield where saving a life and losing one were separated by a few feet of open ground and a sniper's patience. Combat on Okinawa did not stop when the sun went down. The Japanese defenders used the night for infiltration, moving close under cover of darkness, testing the American lines, looking for a gap. Marines learned to sleep when they slept at all, with a hand on their weapon. The men on that ridge lived by that same discipline. Sleep in shifts, weapon within reach, eyes open to every shape that moved in the dark. Here's where it gets strange. In the early hours of one night, somewhere around 2 a.m, a figure came out of the dark and dove directly across the ridge at Akins' position. There was no time to think, no time to call out, no time to be a 19-year-old from a Texas farm town anymore. Akins fired. It was over in less than a second. The kind of second that a man carries for the rest of his life, long after the war has ended, and the ridge has grown back over with grass. He did not talk about that night for most of his life. Not to his teammates, not to his players, not even to his own family. It stayed on Okinawa, the way so much of what happened there stayed with the men who lived through it. The fighting on Okinawa ran until late June of 1945. 82 days that produced more American casualties than any other battle against Japan. By the time it ended, nearly 50,000 Americans had become casualties, 12,500 killed or missing, more than 36,000 wounded. Okinawan civilians paid an even higher price. As many as 100,000 lost their lives, roughly a third of the island's pre-war population. Akins survived all 81 days he was in it, carrying his gun, pulling men from burning tanks, losing 56 pounds off a 19-year-old frame that had nothing left to give. When it was finally over, there was no parade home. His unit was ordered to China, part of the occupation force, and Akins spent 3 or 4 more months there before he was finally discharged. He came home to Texas the way most of that generation came home, quietly, without ceremony, expected to simply pick up a life that the war had interrupted. He did not call himself a hero. He did not think there was anything unusual in what he'd done. Millions of other American boys had done the same thing, on the same beaches, under the same guns. That was simply how he saw it. Ray Akins picked up a whistle instead of a rifle. In 1951, he took his first head coaching job at Lomita, Texas. Over the next 37 years, he coached at Goldthwaite, Tomball, Tidhaven, and Freer, before landing at Gregory-Portland High School in 1965, where he would stay until he retired in 1988. He finished with 293 wins, a state record 12 consecutive district championships, and a trip to the state finals in 1971. Twice he was named Coach of the Year by the Corpus Christi Caller-Times. He was inducted into the Texas High School Football Hall of Fame, the Texas High School Coaches Association Hall of Honor, and received the President Gerald R. Ford All-American High School Coach Award. In 1985, he entered the Texas State University Hall of Honor as well. He coached his own son, Marty Akins, who went on to start at quarterback for the Texas Longhorns from 1972 to 1975, running the wishbone offense that defined an era of Texas football. And years later, his grandson would take a football onto a field of his own, Drew Brees, who would one day lift the Vince Lombardi Trophy as Super Bowl champion with the New Orleans Saints. For decades, most people in Texas knew Ray Akins only as a football coach. It wasn't until 2007, when historians from the National WWII Museum sat him down to record his story, that the wider world learned what he had carried quietly for 60 years. Robert Ray Akins died on December 26, 2017, at 92 years old, on the Robertson County Ranch where he and his wife Virginia had settled after football. A boy from a Depression-era Texas farm town went to the worst battle of the Pacific War, came home, and spent the rest of his life building young men up on a football field instead. He never asked to be remembered as a war hero. He simply was one. America still stands because of men like Ray Akins.